The Nexus chamber of the Galactic Alliance hovered in the heart of a roiling nebula, its crystalline walls refracting prismatic light across the assembly floor. 1,000 alien delegates filled the tiered seats, elongated forms of the Voron coiling in their containment spheres, the iridescent-plated Synthar projecting data streams between their metallic limbs, the Kaleth scholars ruffling their plume-like tendrils in murmured discourse. The air hummed with layered voices, an undercurrent of discussion before the proceedings began. From a raised dais, High Arbiter Zoran watched them with an expression of simmering contempt. His serpentine body, veined with bioluminescent markings, coiled tightly, shifting in agitation. His authority was absolute, unquestioned for centuries, and yet today, the chamber felt different, off balance. The cause of this unease stepped forward onto the central platform. Ambassador Nathaniel Cordain, the lone representative of Earth, strode across the polished surface, his presence an undeniable contrast to the grandeur surrounding him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, clad in a dark diplomatic coat tailored with military precision. No embellishments, no insignias, just unshakable certainty in his step. The low murmur of the chamber dimmed, eyes, stalks, and lenses narrowing on the human as he stopped in the center, exuding the kind of stillness that demanded attention. Zoran's throat pulsed in irritation. He raised an appendage, and the chamber silenced at once. Ambassador Cordain. His voice carried an edge of amusement, the glow along his scales dimming to something akin to boredom. Your species has been summoned to answer for its repeated violations of Alliance law, illegal settlements, rogue fleets, blatant defiance of our authority. And yet you arrive with no entreaties, no submission. Tell me, human, do you not understand your place? Nathaniel met the High Arbiter's gaze without flinching. We understand it perfectly. His voice carried a weight that cut through the chamber. That's why I'm here, not to plead for mercy, but to deliver humanity's final message. A ripple of amusement passed through the delegates, chitinous clicks of the Voron, the oscillating hum of the Synthar, the whispered chortles of the Kaleth. A threat? From a race that barely spanned a dozen systems? The notion was absurd. Zoran's amusement flickered into disdain. A message? Very well. Entertain us, Ambassador. What demands does your fragile world bring before the greatest powers in the galaxy? Nathaniel's stance remained unmoving. Withdraw your enforcers from our systems. Lift the embargoes strangling our colonies. Recognize our sovereignty. He let the words settle, then delivered the final blow. Or prepare to lose everything you believe untouchable. The chamber froze. And then it erupted. Laughter, outright mockery, filled the air. A Voron diplomat's appendages undulated in exaggerated mirth. A Kaleth scholar spread its quilled fronds, the equivalent of a dismissive wave. A Synthar delegate emitted a high-pitched distortion, data rippling in unreadable patterns of derision. Zoran let them revel in their arrogance before he spoke again. You overreach, Cordain. His tone was measured, but beneath it lay a dangerous curiosity. The Alliance commands legions, fleets numbering in the hundreds of thousands, technology centuries beyond your grasp. What exactly does Earth believe it possesses that could warrant such audacity? Nathaniel exhaled slowly, as if indulging a tired student. You believe we're still as we were, scattered, fragile, insignificant. But you never understood us, Arbiter. You saw humanity in isolation. You never imagined what we could become. The laughter faltered. The Kaleth delegate tucked his fronds slightly, his gaze sharpening in consideration. Zoran leaned forward, studying the human with new eyes. Is that so? His glow pulsed, intrigued despite himself. Then educate us, Ambassador. Nathaniel's lips curled in a faint, knowing smile. We watched your empire choke worlds with laws that served only your interests. We listened as you called it order, while entire species were subjugated. We studied your fleets, your strategies, your weaknesses, and we prepared. He let that hang for a moment. You assume we will fall like the others, that we will kneel because the cost of resistance is too high. But here is where you miscalculated. His eyes swept the assembly, the weight of his next words pressing into every delegate's consciousness. We are not afraid of cost. We are willing to endure what you cannot. If you come for us, if you attempt to make humanity kneel, your stars will fall before we ever do. The silence that followed was different. No laughter, no mocking gestures. Just a lingering tension, an uncertainty that had not been present before. Zoran's luminous markings pulsed erratically, an instinctual response to danger. His kind had ruled for centuries, unchallenged, and you speak of defiance as though it carries weight. His voice was quieter now. But history will show that the weak who challenge the strong are wiped from existence. Nathaniel stepped forward. The security drones around the chamber flared to life, tracking him with targeting optics. But he did not stop. The lesson history truly teaches, Arbiter, he said, is that arrogance blinds even the mightiest empire to its own downfall. The words struck harder than any threat. Zoran studied him, his glow fluctuating, unreadable. At last he waved a dismissive tendril. We will deliberate your proposal, human. But do not expect mercy. The Alliance does not negotiate with those who have no leverage. Nathaniel dipped his head slightly, the movement calculated, deliberate. This is not a negotiation, Arbiter. It's the only warning you'll receive. Without another word, he turned, footsteps echoing against the chamber floor. No one stopped him. Long after he was gone, the silence remained. Deep within an asteroid belt, hidden from prying eyes, a fortress pulsed with quiet energy. Sigma Prime, humanity's shadowed stronghold, was more than a military installation. It was the beating heart of Earth's defiance. Inside the command center, laser plasma displays projected the latest intelligence across the war table. Admiral Tobias Vance stood with arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the shifting markers of enemy movements. Beside him, Commander Idris Rowe adjusted tactical overlays, his mind already calculating contingencies. Nathaniel stepped into the room. Vance turned, studying the ambassador's expression. He already knew the answer before he asked. They laughed, Nathaniel confirmed. They don't believe we're a threat. A slow, grim smile spread across Vance's face. Good. Idris locked eyes with him. Then it begins. Nathaniel nodded. Execute Project Eclipse. The room darkened as the displays shifted, red targets appearing over key Alliance installations. The first strike was already in motion. The war table in Sigma Prime cast shifting red shadows across the dimly lit command center. Target markers flickered across the laser plasma displays. Alliance fleet hubs, planetary garrisons, deep space supply chains, each one a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. The room pulsed with controlled urgency, officers moving between consoles, quiet voices exchanging tactical assessments. Admiral Tobias Vance stood at the helm, his weathered face illuminated by the digital maps that outlined humanity's first strike. Commander Idris Rowe, his closest strategist, studied the incoming intelligence streams, fingers gliding across the interface to update fleet trajectories. The air between them was heavy with unspoken certainty. The moment the Alliance dismissed Nathaniel Cordain's ultimatum, their fate had been sealed. Nathaniel entered the room, his coat still carrying the faint chill of the Nexus chamber. He didn't need to say a word. The smirk tugging at Vance's lips said it all. They laughed, Nathaniel said, his voice edged with quiet amusement. Vance exhaled, turning his gaze back to the display. Perfect. Idris tapped the panel, bringing up an isolated cluster of red markers. Then we proceed. Phase 1 is set to deploy within the hour. Major Trent's unit has infiltrated Voron Prime and established control over key subsystems. A sharp confirmation beep signaled an incoming transmission. The laser plasma display flickered, resolving into the face of Major Elias Trent, his expression shadowed by the dim emergency lights of his hidden outpost. The view behind him was a chaos of Voron Prime's inner workings, maintenance corridors running with coolant mist, flickering power conduits exposed from deliberate sabotage. "Admiral," Trent greeted, voice steady despite the tension threading through the air. "We're in position. Security still thinks we're maintenance techs. Power relays are set to overload and we've rerouted the automated defenses. When the attack begins, they'll be firing on ghosts." Vance nodded. "And the fleet?" Trent's eyes flicked to something off-screen. "Docked in the lower quadrants. The shipyard's full, hundreds of vessels in various stages of construction. Most of their crews are still in cryo-sleep." He let the statement hang. Vance's jaw tightened. "Good. Less blood spilled before they realize what's happening." Nathaniel crossed his arms. "Then we move now. We need the Alliance to know they've already lost before they even fire a shot." Trent gave a sharp nod. Then the transmission cut out. The war table refreshed, displaying the updated data feed of Voron Prime's security systems, all compromised. Idris stepped back, arms folded. "They don't see it yet. They think we're still just one planet." His eyes flicked up, meeting Vance's gaze. "Let's show them how wrong they are." The corridors of Voron Prime's lower decks were eerily quiet, the usual bustle of engineers and fleet technicians replaced by automated systems. The Empire's most valuable shipyard, the heart of their military production, was operating under the illusion of control. That illusion shattered the moment Major Elias Trent activated the breach codes. A sequence of dull mechanical thuds reverberated through the corridors as docking clamps disengaged. The blinking guidance lights along the walls stuttered, then pulsed red. A warning klaxon blared. A pre-programmed malfunction designed to cover the true cause of the disruption. Inside the facility's control hub, an Alliance overseer, a multi-limbed Sarathian, frantically tapped at his interface, his eye clusters expanding in confusion. The station's defense grid was cycling erratically, identifying hostiles where none existed. Automated cannons swiveled aimlessly, locking onto empty space. "Override the security matrix," the overseer barked, his limbs blurring across the console. A low chime. Access denied. And then the lights went out. "The shipyard is blind," Idris reported, watching the feed as Voron Prime's internal security collapsed. "Their response time is slower than expected." Vance exhaled, adjusting the tactical overlays. That's the problem with invincible empires. No one ever prepares for the day they aren't. Nathaniel's gaze locked onto the fleet formations displayed in real time. The Alliance had left their most crucial military assets unguarded, convinced that no species in the galaxy would dare strike first. Humanity had dared. Idris tapped into the main fleet coordination uplink. "Commander Graves, you're greenlit. Launch the strike." The bridge of the Umbra, humanity's flagship stealth cruiser, was bathed in the cold glow of targeting readouts and flight vectors. Captain Lucian Graves watched the feed from the war table with a calculated stillness. "Firing solutions locked," his weapons officer murmured. Graves raised a single hand. "Engage." From the void, kinetic strike pods deployed, slamming into Voron Prime's exposed reactor cooling arrays. No explosive detonations, no grand display. Just silent, devastating structural collapses as impact shockwaves ruptured the shipyard's spine. Inside the facility, systems failed in cascading succession. Fabrication lines stuttered and halted, half-assembled warships dropping like useless husks from their docking frames. Fuel conduits ruptured, sending streams of ignited plasma careening through the corridors. The overseer inside the control hub barely had time to process the alarms flashing across his console before the final blow landed. A fleet of human warships, cloaked in the same stolen technology the Alliance once used to subjugate other species, decloaked in unison. A chorus of warning sirens filled the sky as the first barrage of heavy rounds tore through the upper docks. Voron Prime had fallen in under 3 minutes. The Nexus chamber was in disarray. Reports from Voron Prime poured into the central intelligence grid, their contents impossible to deny. The shipyard was gone. The Alliance's strongest industrial asset was in ruins. High Arbiter Zoran's bioluminescence dimmed in raw disbelief. He had not even issued a command before humanity's retribution struck. A Voron delegate's tentacles twisted in stunned panic. How is this possible? The Synthar intelligence officer, usually composed, emitted a sharp flicker of distress. The humans, he began, but stopped, unable to form the words. It was Chancellor Varric of the Hashari Dominion, one of the oldest members of the Council, who finally spoke. His voice was not mocking. It was quiet, frightened. They've already won the first battle. Zoran turned sharply, his throat pulsing. This isn't over. It can't be. The chamber stilled as a new transmission materialized across the main display. The image of Nathaniel Cordain came into focus, his face as unreadable as it had been during the ultimatum. But this time, the mockery was gone. "High Arbiter," he said, voice cold. "You assumed we had no leverage." He tilted his head, as if surveying the destruction through their own reports. "Now do you understand?" The transmission cut. The chamber fell silent. Back at Sigma Prime, Idris watched the feed scroll across the laser plasma displays, his expression unreadable. "They're still trying to process it," he muttered. Vance exhaled, a rare flicker of satisfaction passing over his features. "Then let's not give them the chance." He turned to the fleet officers gathered around the war table. "Phase 2 begins now." The Nexus chamber was no longer a hall of order. It had become a battlefield of voices, alien tongues clashing in argument, disbelief, and something that had never existed in this council before: fear. The loss of Voron Prime was more than a military setback. It was a fracture in the foundation of the Galactic Alliance's supremacy. For centuries, they had dictated the fates of entire species, imposed their will without consequence. No species had ever struck first. None had ever delivered a warning and followed through. Humanity had. High Arbiter Zoran stood rigid on his dais, his body language betraying none of the turmoil beneath his skin. His glow had dimmed, not from anger, but from something colder, deeper. His mind cycled through possibilities, through calculations, through denial. His voice was steady, but the chamber's sensors detected the subtle shifts in his biorhythms. This was not an act of war. Chancellor Varric of the Hashari Dominion let out a low breath, his multi-lidded eyes narrowing. An entire fleet production hub reduced to wreckage in under 3 minutes, and you claim this is not war? Zoran's coils tightened. It was an act of sabotage. He let the words slither through the air, grasping for control. An opening move. It does not mean humanity has the strength to stand against us. The Synthar intelligence officer, his crystalline limbs flickering with distress, spoke in a voice devoid of its usual mechanical certainty. They infiltrated the shipyard's network, reprogrammed our defenses to fire on empty space, crippled automated response teams. The efficiency of their attack indicates an intelligence network embedded deep within our systems. His compound eyes narrowed. This was not impulse. This was a plan. A Voron delegate let out a low, uneasy chitter. The fact remains, we dismissed their threat, and now one of our strongest sectors lies in ruin. Zoran cut off the rising murmurs with a flick of his appendage. Then we respond, with force. His gaze burned as he addressed the room. Their strike was meant to intimidate. We will remind them why no one defies the Alliance. His form pulsed, voice cold and absolute. Deploy the fleets. Wipe them from the stars. A heads-up display projected a tactical map above the war table, shifting with incoming data streams. Idris Rose stood over the interface, his fingers tapping through intercepted communications. They're moving faster than expected. Admiral Tobias Vance exhaled slowly. Panic breeds mistakes. His gaze remained locked on the incoming reports. The Alliance wasn't hesitating. Retaliation fleets were already forming, hundreds of ships converging on human space. Nathaniel Cordain studied the projections. We knew they'd come for blood. Vance nodded, voice calm. They still think we're fighting a conventional war. His fingers flicked across the display, zooming in on a critical supply corridor. They're committing too many resources to offense. That leaves their supply lines exposed. Idris smirked. We starve them before they even reach our borders. Vance nodded. Send word to Captain Lucian Graves. The Valor moved with the weight of a war machine bred for subjugation. One of the Empire's flagships, its hull gleamed with reinforced alloy plating, its weapons banks capable of obliterating entire cities in a single strike. It led a fleet of 200 ships, all poised for a single purpose: crush humanity before it could resist. On the bridge, Fleet Marshal Oren Vosk stood with arms clasped behind his back, his expression carved from stone. He had been in command of planetary sieges before, had watched civilizations collapse under the might of the Alliance. This would be no different. The shipyard attack was meant to make us hesitate, he said, his voice cool. We do not hesitate. An officer turned from his station. We are on approach to the outer colonies. No defensive fleets detected. Vosk barely acknowledged the report. Of course not. They're running. He tilted his head slightly. Send a preliminary bombardment. Let them understand what resistance costs. The weapons officer nodded, keying in the firing sequence. Then every alarm in the ship erupted. The lights along the bridge flickered, screens distorting with bursts of corrupted data. One of the navigation officers let out a sharp curse as the Valor's guidance systems locked, the ship veering into a force drag. Status report! Vosk barked, his voice suddenly sharp. The tactical officer's mandibles clicked in alarm. Vosk's expression twisted, his grip tightening on the command console. Retreat was unthinkable. The Alliance did not run. They did not lose. And yet, as another detonation tore through the core decks of a destroyer, sending it spiraling into oblivion, reality settled in. This isn't a battle, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. It's an execution. For the first time in his career, he gave the order that had never once left his lips. Withdraw. Back at Sigma Prime, Vance watched as the final data came in. The Alliance's first retaliation fleet, crippled, their forces routed, their commanders shaken. Idris leaned against the war table, exhaling slowly. They just realized they've never fought a war like this before. Nathaniel glanced at the casualty reports, silent for a long moment before speaking. What's the response from the Nexus chamber? Vance allowed himself a faint, grim smile. They're still trying to figure out how they lost 2 battles before their declaration of war even finished processing. Idris smirked. That'll keep them busy. Vance nodded, folding his arms. Good, because the next strike won't be on their fleets. He turned back to the war table, bringing up the next set of targets. We're going for their homeworlds. The Nexus chamber had known silence before, the measured stillness of deliberation, the quiet weight of decision-making. But this was not that silence. This was the silence of something cracking. High Arbiter Zoran sat motionless, his form dimming as fleet casualty reports streamed across the laser plasma displays hovering above the central platform. Each line of data was a scar across the invincibility the Alliance had once believed unshakable. The first retaliation fleet, routed. Voron Prime, the heart of their military production, erased. And now, human forces were on the move again. "They aren't just defending themselves," Chancellor Varick said, his voice quieter than before. "They're hunting us." The word sent a ripple through the council. The concept was unthinkable. No species had ever fought the Alliance with this level of intent, this cold, calculated efficiency. A Caliph scholar shifted on his perch, his fronds pressed tight against his form. "Perhaps," he hesitated, the words foreign in his throat. "Perhaps we should reconsider the terms of engagement." Zoran's gaze snapped to him, cold and sharp. "Are you suggesting we negotiate?" Another voice, this time from Grand Strategist Siren, leader of the Alliance Military Council. His plated form was still, but his bioluminescence flickered in agitation. "I am suggesting," Siren said slowly, "that we have already lost 2 battles before we have even launched a proper counteroffensive. The humans anticipated our response." The chamber shifted uneasily. Zoran exhaled, the glow along his tendrils pulsing in agitation. "Then we correct our mistake." His fingers tapped a sequence into the interface before him, and the next wave of deployments flickered onto the displays. "We are done reacting," he said. His voice was a knife in the room. "We strike first. We take their home. We remind them what it means to defy us." There was no more discussion. The order was given. The war table projected a map of human space, its borders a battlefield in waiting. Nathaniel Cordain stood over the display, watching the shifting markers as Alliance fleets began mobilizing. "They're not hesitating this time," he murmured. "They can't," Admiral Tobias Vance replied, arms folded. "They thought they could break us with a single show of force. That failed. Now they're throwing everything they have to make sure this war doesn't spread." Commander Idris Rowe narrowed his eyes at the latest movement reports. "They're overcommitting. Again." Nathaniel studied the patterns forming on the display. "Because they're still playing by their old rules." He looked up, his expression cold. "They don't realize they're already losing." Vance's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then let's show them." He gestured toward Idris. "Put the next phase in motion." The Alliance war fleet emerged from slipspace, its formation stretching across the starfield. Hundreds of vessels, capital ships, dreadnoughts, interceptors, a show of force designed to crush entire worlds. At the center, Fleetmaster Calris stood aboard the bridge of the Imperium's Wrath, his sensory tendrils coiled in satisfaction. "This will be the last stand of humanity," he said, watching the planetary defenses light up in response. The human colony, Callus 4, was a key industrial world. Its destruction would cripple Earth's war machine. The order came. "Begin the orbital bombardment." Weapons primed, targeting systems locked, then the entire Alliance fleet lost power. Calris froze as the bridge plunged into chaos. Displays flickered. Navigation controls became unresponsive. One of his officers stumbled back from his station. "Sir, the fleet! We're being overridden!" Calris's form pulsed erratically. "By who?" The answer came before the words could. A series of implosions ripped through the Imperium's Wrath, detonations burrowing through its hull like precision strikes, not from human ships, from its own systems. Calris turned toward his security officer, but the Synthar's entire form had gone rigid. "They're inside our network," he rasped. "They turned our ships against us." And then the human fleet decloaked. Not from the colony, from inside their own formation. The first railgun volleys split open Alliance capital ships like eggshells. The First Fleet's weapons were still offline, shields failing as entire sections of their formation collapsed into fire and wreckage. Calris barely had time to react before his own ship lost atmospheric integrity. Fleet's breaking, Idris reported, watching the latest casualty reports update. They just lost another 40 ships in under 5 minutes. Nathaniel exhaled. They still don't understand, do they? Vance's voice was calm. They will. Zoran's glow had dimmed to a flickering pulse, his composure cracking. The latest battle report looped in the chamber's center. A third fleet, destroyed before it could fire a single shot. Cyrn spoke first, his voice a blade through the silence. We are being systematically dismantled. Zoran forced his coils to remain still. They are savages. It is a temporary advantage. Varric's voice was sharper than before. You are still not listening. Silence. The Hashari Chancellor's gaze burned into him. They have turned our own fleet doctrine against us. They do not fight like prey. His fingers curled. They fight like conquerors. The chamber stilled. No one wanted to say it. That this war, the one they had dismissed as trivial, was not one they could win. Then a new transmission blinked onto the display. Nathaniel Cordain. The chamber froze as his image solidified, standing in the command center of Sigma Prime, watching them as if he had already won. High Arbiter, he said, his voice quiet, unhurried. Are you ready to listen now? Zoran did not speak. Nathaniel's gaze swept across the chamber, his expression unreadable. We don't want your empire, he continued. We don't care about your titles, your legacy, your claim to rule. He tilted his head slightly. But we will burn it down before we let you rule us. A long silence. Zoran's body remained still. What do you want? Nathaniel exhaled. You already know the answer. The transmission cut. The chamber remained still. Because this was no longer a war for survival. This was a war for control. And for the first time in Alliance history, they were no longer the ones who had it. The Nexus Chamber was no longer an assembly of rulers. It was a room of survivors, clinging to the last remnants of a power structure that had never been questioned, until now. 3 fleets lost, key shipyards erased, supply chains fractured beyond repair. Humanity was not fighting for survival anymore. It was dismantling the Alliance piece by piece. High Arbiter Zoran stared at the frozen image of Nathaniel Cordain, his last words lingering like a toxin in the air. We will burn it down before we let you rule us. Across the chamber, the usual arrogance of the delegates was gone. The Synthar intelligence officer, once dismissive, stood motionless, his data streams flickering erratically as he recalculated projections. Varric, the Hashari Chancellor, had gone silent, fingers drumming against the table, a subconscious tell of a species bred for war. Even Cyrn, the grand strategist, had nothing to say, because there was no strategy against an enemy that understood the rules of war better than they did. Zoran's gaze darkened. If they want a war for control, he murmured, then we will end it. The words sent a ripple through the council. Varric straightened. We still control the core systems. They have struck from the shadows, but they do not hold territory. That is where we have the advantage. Cairn's voice was lower, measured. We lure them out, make them overreach. A plan was forming, one that played to human nature. They fought like hunters, striking at weakness and retreating before retaliation. But every predator could be baited. Zoran leaned forward. We leave them an opening, and when they take it, we crush them. Laser plasma displays scrolled with intercepted transmissions, the Alliance's fleet movements shifting in real time. Nathaniel Cordain studied the sudden repositioning of enemy forces. They're retreating. Admiral Tobias Vance exhaled slowly. They're making it look like a retreat. His fingers tapped against the war table. They want us to push forward, to commit. Commander Idris Rowe leaned over the interface. tracing a finger along a projected supply route left seemingly unguarded. They think we'll move into secure territory. His gaze flicked to Nathaniel. They still don't get it. Nathaniel nodded. We don't want their territory. Idris's smirk was sharp. So, we use their own bait against them. Vance turned to the fleet commanders gathered around the war table. We hit them where they expect it, but not how they expect it. The plan took shape in the cold silence of calculation. The Alliance's fleet lay in wait, hidden in the gravity wells of a gas giant, its formation sprawling across the empty trade route. Hundreds of ships, dreadnoughts, planetary assault carriers, interceptor wings, an armada meant to trap humanity's fleet the moment it tried to claim the unguarded corridor. Fleet Marshal Varric stood on the bridge of the Imperium's aegis, his focus razor-sharp. Hold position, he commanded. They will take the bait. For hours, there was nothing. Then, movement. A small detachment of human warships emerged from the far edge of the system, approaching the trade route cautiously, as if probing for weakness. Varric's mandibles tightened. Wait for them to commit. The human ships slowed, moving as though scanning for hidden forces. Their formations were tight, defensive, unsure if the corridor was truly abandoned. More ships jumped in, taking up positions. Almost, Varric murmured. Almost. And then the signal came. Sir, an officer called out, tension in his voice. Something's wrong. Varric's gaze snapped to the sensor feed. The human ships weren't advancing anymore. They were stalling. No, they were waiting. A new signature flared across the displays. Above them, hundreds of contacts. Not ships, kinetic payloads, descending at terminal velocity. Varric's mind reeled. Number no, no, no. The first impacts struck like thunder cracking through the void. Ships crumpled like paper under the force. Shields meant for energy weapons meant nothing against the sheer physical devastation of the assault. The human fleet had never intended to take the trade route. They had used it to corral the Alliance into a kill box. The final transmission flickered onto Varric's display as the Imperium's aegis shuddered under the impact of a direct payload hit. Nathaniel Cordain's face, expression calm, eyes cold. This is what happens when you try to bait a species that spent its entire history hunting. The transmission cut, and the Alliance's trap became a graveyard. Idris exhaled, watching the data feeds stream in. That's another fleet down, he murmured. Vance's expression was unreadable. They'll realize soon. Nathaniel nodded. That they're not fighting an enemy trying to survive. He turned from the war table, his voice a quiet finality. We're here to end them. The chamber was no longer filled with strategic discussion. It was infighting. Alliance leaders, once unified in their supremacy, were breaking. Another fleet, gone. They're targeting our supply chains. They are undoing us. Zoran's voice cut through the noise. Enough. Silence. He looked across the room. The reality of the war was sinking in. They had never fought an enemy like this. Nathaniel Cordain's words echoed in his mind. We don't want your empire, but we will burn it down before we let you rule us. Zoran inhaled slowly. His gaze darkened. Then we burn them first. The Alliance's final plan was about to begin. And for the first time, the war was no longer about control. It was about survival. For both sides. The Nexus Chamber was coming apart. Delegates that once sat in rigid ranks were arguing, shouting, demanding answers that did not exist. The Galactic Alliance, an entity that had ruled the stars with unchallenged dominance for centuries, was now watching its control slip through its fingers. The humans had changed the nature of war. They had not fought for survival. They had fought to destroy the very foundation the Alliance had built itself upon. And they were succeeding. High Arbiter Zoran sat at the center of the chaos, his bioluminescence dim, his mind calculating. The losses weren't just military, they were structural. Supply chains collapsed before reinforcements could arrive. Starports, once considered untouchable, were crippled by kinetic strikes and sabotage. The humans didn't fight where they were expected. They fought where it mattered. And for the first time in Alliance history, there were murmurs, real, dangerous whispers of rebellion. Varric, the Hashari Chancellor, broke the silence. His voice was quiet but lethal. "We are losing this war." A ripple of unease. Grand Strategist Cern turned sharply, his tendrils stiffening. "We are not finished." Varric's gaze cut through him. "Then explain how 3 entire fleets have been annihilated." His mandibles clicked. "How our people are turning against us." Zoran exhaled, the weight of reality settling upon him. "Because the humans have done what no species has ever done before." The chamber stilled. "They have shown the galaxy," Zoran murmured, "that we can be bled." The war table was no longer just a battle map. It was a ledger of victories. Key alliance supply routes, compromised. High-priority command centers, obliterated. Political alliances, fracturing. Humanity had done more than fight back. It had turned the galaxy against its oppressors. Admiral Tobias Vance stood with arms crossed, watching the latest intelligence feeds with an unreadable expression. Commander Idris Rowe let out a quiet breath. "It's happening, isn't it?" Nathaniel Cordain leaned forward over the table, studying the revolts breaking out across Alliance-controlled worlds. "It was never just about beating their fleets," he murmured. "It was about making their rule impossible." Vance's lips curled slightly. "We didn't start this war alone." He gestured to the map, where red markers blinked across the Alliance's core territories. "And we won't end it alone either." A new transmission flashed onto the display. A Kaleth defector. One of the Alliance's own council members. Vance's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Well, this should be interesting." The Kaleth vessel floated in a secured position, its energy readings lowered, its signal masked against Alliance patrols. Inside the command chamber, Ambassador Koresh, a high-ranking Kaleth diplomat, stood before the projection of Nathaniel Cordain, his feathered crest shifting in tension. "Understand this, human," Koresh said slowly. "This is not an alliance." Nathaniel met his gaze, unblinking. "Of course not." Koresh's fronds bristled. "We have watched your war with interest and concern." He shifted slightly. "There are many within the council who now question our leadership." Nathaniel's voice was calm. "Because they know it's crumbling." Koresh hesitated. His species had always been political survivors. They knew when an empire was falling, and this one was. "You need information," Koresh murmured, "and we need a way out." Nathaniel exhaled slowly. "Then let's talk." The council was no longer an entity of order. It was fractured. Reports flooded in. Planetary governors refusing orders. Ship captains defying recall commands. Entire worlds questioning their loyalty. Varric turned to Zoran, his voice sharp. "We cannot hold this together." Zoran's glow pulsed. "Then we do what must be done." Cern's form stiffened. "And what is that?" Zoran exhaled, a cold finality in his tone. "We destroy their home." The chamber went silent. Even Varric hesitated. "You would break the very laws we built this empire upon." Zoran's gaze was steel. "There will be no empire if we do not." A final decision was made. The last fleet was mobilized, and the target was Earth. The moment the fleet mobilized, human intelligence flagged the movement. Inside Sigma Prime, the war table pulsed with the Alliance's final desperate play. Vance inhaled sharply. "They're coming for Earth." Nathaniel nodded, expression unreadable. "Then we make sure they never reach it." Idris's fingers flew across the display. Our fleets are positioned, but we'll need to hit them before they reach the inner colonies. A new voice entered the room. Koresh, the Caliph defector. There is one way, he said. Nathaniel turned, waiting. Koresh's feathers shifted. A relay gate, a slipspace corridor only used by high-priority fleets. If you intercept them there, you can trap them before they reach your system. Vance studied him. And why would you tell us this? Koresh's voice was quiet. Because if they destroy Earth, they will burn every world that dared question them next. A long silence. Then Nathaniel nodded. We move now. The Alliance's last fleet surged through slipspace, hurtling toward the relay gate that would bring them within striking distance of Earth. Fleet Marshal Siren stood at the helm, his focus unshakable. We end them today. But as the fleet neared the relay gate, something was waiting. Humanity's fleet, not running, not defending, blocking the way forward. Inside the command center of the Intrepid, Admiral Vance stood at the helm, watching the enemy fleet bear down upon them. This is it, Idris murmured. Nathaniel exhaled, voice calm. Then let's finish it. The final battle had begun. And this time there would be no retreat. The relay gate stood ahead, a massive construct suspended in the void, its structure laced with power, conduits pulsing with energy. It was the last checkpoint before the Alliance's final fleet could breach human space. But now, they weren't the ones setting the terms. Inside the Intrepid, Admiral Tobias Vance stood at the center of the command bridge, eyes locked onto the tactical display. The Alliance fleet was inbound, massive, overwhelming but committed. They're not stopping, Commander Idris Rowe noted, watching as enemy ships accelerated toward the relay gate. Vance's voice was steady. Because they think they have no choice. Nathaniel Cordain, standing just behind them, exhaled slowly. And that's exactly why they've already lost. The Alliance had burned every bridge behind them. They had no fallback, no reinforcements, no second chances. This was their final move, and humanity was ready for it. Vance turned to his fleet officers. Initiate Project Eclipse. Fleet Marshal Siren watched the human fleet standing in their path. They mean to hold us here, his second-in-command muttered. Siren's tendrils coiled tightly. Then we push through. The order was given. Alliance dreadnoughts surged forward, their weapons banks igniting, unleashing torrents of energy barrages that streaked toward the human fleet. Carriers deployed fighters in waves, the sky filling with interceptors and bombers. But the humans didn't fire back immediately. They waited. And then the relay gate flickered. Siren's focus snapped toward it. What was that? The structure's power signatures shifted. The energy conduits pulsed out of sync. His command officer's voice was sharp with alarm. Something is... The relay gate collapsed. One moment, it was a monument of control, the Alliance's direct path to Earth. The next, it imploded from within. A series of chain detonations rippled along its structure, breaking apart the very fabric of the slipstream corridor. Shock waves pulsed outward, the distortion fields scrambling navigation systems, throwing ships into chaotic drift. Siren's mandibles clenched. They sabotaged the gate! His second-in-command turned in disbelief. They've trapped us! Not just trapped, stranded. With the relay destroyed, there was no retreat. The only way forward was through the human fleet. And then the real attack began. Human warships erupted from hidden positions along the debris fields, previously cloaked, now striking at the exposed Alliance formation. The first railgun salvos cut through shields, struggling to recalibrate, sending fractured hulls spiraling into the void. Alliance battlecruisers attempted to reorganize, but the human fleet had positioned itself to break them apart. Tactical choke points formed, bottling the enemy forces into kill zones. Siren watched in cold horror as his own ships were forced against one another, trapped by the very formation that was meant to overwhelm. And then the boarding teams landed. The Imperium's Wrath, the command vessel of the Alliance's fleet, shook violently as internal explosions rattled its frame. Siren stood firm, watching human strike teams breach through the lower decks. His officers fought to stabilize communications, but every attempt met jamming fields and silent frequencies. "They're inside the ship," someone gasped. Siren drew his blade. "Then we fight them here." The first breach charges detonated, and human operatives stormed through the corridors, moving with lethal efficiency. They didn't waste time. They didn't slow down. Every movement was measured, every shot deliberate. The Alliance's warriors, elites, genetically modified, bred for war, were losing. One by one, key control centers fell, until finally the command bridge doors burst open. Siren raised his weapon, his tendons coiled for a final stand. And then he saw who had entered. Nathaniel Cordain, and behind him, a wall of silent, unyielding human soldiers. The bridge fell quiet. No grand speech, no pleas. Nathaniel raised his weapon and fired. And with that, the last commander of the Alliance fleet fell. The battle ended within the hour. Humanity's forces moved methodically, dismantling what was left of the Alliance's final fleet. On board the Intrepid, Vance watched as the last enemy signals faded from the war table. Idris leaned forward, scanning the tactical readout. "There's no command structure left." Nathaniel exhaled. "Because there's no empire left." Silence stretched across the bridge. A quiet realization settled. The war was over. They had won. The Nexus chamber was unrecognizable. The seats of power stood empty. Messages from defecting worlds flooded in. Planetary governors declared independence. The Galactic Alliance had shattered. High Arbiter. Zoran sat alone in the chamber, his once proud form dim, his mind quiet. For the first time in his existence, he understood what it meant to lose. And then the final transmission came. Nathaniel Cordain's face appeared before him. Zoran stared at the human who had undone everything. Nathaniel's voice was steady. "This was never about conquest," he said. "We didn't take your empire." He leaned forward. "You gave it away." Zoran exhaled, eyes closing. He knew the war was over. Nathaniel's gaze remained unreadable. The stars belonged to everyone now. The transmission cut, and with it, the reign of the Galactic Alliance ended. Inside Sigma Prime, the war table no longer displayed targets. It displayed territories in transition. Humanity had not conquered. It had liberated. Vance stood beside Nathaniel, both men watching the galaxy reshape itself. Idris folded his arms. "We actually did it." Nathaniel's expression didn't change. We started it. The future of the stars had changed, and humanity was now its greatest force. The Galactic Alliance was no more. Worlds once bound by fear now stood on their own, their former rulers scattered, defeated, or dead. No decree from the Nexus chamber carried weight. No fleet remained to enforce its will. The age of submission had ended. But the reckoning had only begun. Inside the command center, the war table no longer showed battle formations. Instead, it displayed a galaxy in flux, power vacuums forming where oppression had crumbled, new alliances rising where chains had been broken. Admiral Tobias Vance stood at the head of it all, watching the pieces rearrange themselves. "They're afraid," Commander Idris Rowe murmured, scanning the latest transmissions. "Not of the Alliance anymore, of us." Nathaniel Cordain stepped forward, arms crossed as he surveyed the shifting political landscape. "They should be." Vance exhaled. "We didn't just break an empire, Nathaniel. We changed everything." Nathaniel nodded. "And now we decide what comes next." The transmission had gone out across the former territories of the Alliance. The last ruler of the Galactic Order, High Arbiter Zoran, was to stand trial. Captured in the ruins of the Nexus chamber, he had not fled. He had not begged. He had sat, unmoving, waiting for the inevitable. And now, the time had come. The trial was not held in secrecy. It was broadcast across every liberated world, to every species that had once feared the Alliance's grip, not just as a sentence, but as a message. Nathaniel Cordain stood before the gathering of leaders, his presence calm, unshaken. The image of Voron was displayed on the laser plasma feeds, his form dimmed, the once imposing arbiter of the stars reduced to a figure of silence. Nathaniel's voice carried through the broadcast. For centuries, the Galactic Alliance ruled through fear. They did not govern. They controlled. They did not protect. They consumed. He let the weight of those words settle. They built their empire on the backs of the weak, believing themselves untouchable. They were wrong. Zoran's gaze did not waver. If you are going to execute me, then do it. I will not plead. Nathaniel studied him. You misunderstand. A flicker of something passed through Zoran's form, the first sign of uncertainty. Nathaniel stepped closer. Killing you solves nothing. The old order is already dead. You will not be remembered as a martyr, nor will you be feared as a legend. He gestured toward the display, showing the chaos unfolding across the former Alliance territories. Look at them. The worlds you once ruled. The fleets that once carried your banners. They aren't mourning you. They aren't rallying behind you. He leaned in, voice quiet, cutting like a blade. They are forgetting you. Zoran's glow flickered, not in anger, not in defiance, but in understanding. His existence no longer mattered. Nathaniel straightened. You will spend the rest of your life watching everything you built fade into nothing. Your power, your rule, your very name. It will become a whisper of a dead age. The sentence was passed. Voron was not executed. He was erased. And with him, the last remnants of the Alliance's tyranny. Even with the Alliance gone, the message had to be clear. Humanity had not just fought for itself. It had fought for every world that had suffered under the old rule. A final broadcast was sent, one that would echo across the galaxy for generations. Nathaniel Cordain stood before the galaxy's leaders, his words unwavering. This war was not about conquest, it was about freedom. His gaze was steady, his tone absolute. The next ruler who thinks they can enslave the weak, who believes they can bend the stars to their will without consequence, remember this. He paused. The Galactic Alliance thought the same. His expression hardened. And now they no longer exist. Silence. A warning had been given. And this time, the galaxy would listen. Beneath the skyline of New Eden, the capital of the rebuilt human colonies, the air was no longer filled with the tension of war. For the first time in generations, the stars were open. Ships launched from the orbital docks, not as invaders, not as exiles, but as explorers, as free people. Humanity had not claimed the throne of the fallen alliance. It had torn the throne apart. The future belonged to no single ruler. It belonged to all. And as the first diplomatic vessels left for the newly independent worlds, one thing was certain. The age of the Alliance had ended, and the age of humanity had begun. Nathaniel Cordain stood alone on the observation deck of Sigma Prime, watching the galaxy stretch before him. Vance's voice came from behind. So, what now? Nathaniel didn't turn. Now? He exhaled, the weight of a new era settling in his chest. Now we see what a free galaxy really looks like. He looked up, his eyes catching the light of 1,000 unconquered worlds. The war had ended, but the story of humanity had only just begun, and the stars would never be the same again.